Steve Bowers welcoming you to Capitol Talk, a presentation of the Chamber here in Jackson on E+ TV6. Our guest is Congressman David Kustoff. We do want to acknowledge the sponsorship of the people that make this possible: the Allison Insurance Group, ATA, Alexander Thompson and Arnold, AT&T, First Bank, Gerdau, the Jackson Energy Authority, Stan Harris, Voya, Steve Little and Brad Little, representative agents are there, and West Tennessee Healthcare. We thank them all for making this possible. Thank you for doing this, making this time available.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me.
As we are doing this, the President of the United States has been in Pittsburgh and announcing infrastructure package and other things. There are also revenue concerns. We'll get into all of that. I don't guess there's any denying that infrastructure improvements are needed in areas of this country. Things are good. What do you feel about all this?
Well, infrastructure traditionally is bipartisan. And Steve, I think about it, I've been to 4 President Trump State of the Union speeches. Right. And you've seen enough of them where, you know, half of the congressmen and senators stand up and clap and the others are sitting on their hands. Yeah. During President Trump's State of the Union addresses, when he talked about infrastructure, each and every time he got a standing ovation from everybody. It is bipartisan, but I think that President Biden missed a huge opportunity, because when he gave his inaugural speech, he said the things he should have said. If you wrote the speech, you would have had it just like he did, where he talked about bipartisanship and unity. So if that was the theme, if that was the stage that was being set, in my opinion, the very first major initiative of President Biden should have been infrastructure. And instead, he pushed through a $1.9 trillion COVID package. Now, I'm getting to your question, but I think it's important to set the stage. It became very partisan for a lot of different reasons. A tremendous amount of money that was approved by Congress on party lines. A lot of it, in my opinion, not necessary, too much money. And so now the next big initiative is infrastructure. And the problem is, from a lot of people who share my standpoint, who are conservatives, who are Republicans, we have now voted over the last year to spend a tremendous amount of money, in excess of $5 trillion. I mean, try to wrap your arms around that number. Yeah. And so here's President Biden talking about maybe a $3 trillion infrastructure plan, maybe. Some of which, when I think about infrastructure, I think probably a lot of people who are watching think about infrastructure. We're thinking about roads and asphalt and bridges and airports and buildings and probably rural broadband. They're going to include some Green New Deal climate initiatives in there. Okay. And then on top of that, for some on the left, for some of the progressives, they say that $3 trillion isn't enough. And there are some that are talking about, if you can't get your arms around $3 trillion, try to get your arms around $10 trillion, which is what some of the progressives are talking about. So I think that on the House of Representatives side of the aisle, among Republicans, if the bill gets written the way I think it's going to get written, it may not get one Republican vote. Okay. And that's a shame, because, again, I think he could have, if he had started off, led off and had Republican support. I think it's a tough haul.
This last election, and the emphasis has been on the presidential election, but Republicans gained seats in the House.
We did.
And then until you got to the 2 seats in Georgia, and I think that environment right at the end. But there are moderate Democrats in some key districts out there that are facing election next year. Can a 210 vote majority hold when you get into that level of spending, or will there be debate on this?
Well, you brought up an interesting point. Well, a lot of times we focus at the very top, right, president. Yeah. And it was projected that Republicans were going to lose between 15 and 25 seats in that November election. We actually gained seats. All right. And so now, we're around 212, give or take. So with that, and the magic number for the majority is 218.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
So we're right on the cusp. And you're right, there are moderate Democrats out there who need to.
I mean, I understand there's tremendous party line pressure there from the speaker and everybody else. But then at the same time, when you start talking trillions, or you have elements of your party saying, well, it needs to be 10 trillion, which is less than some of the figures I've heard, then I would think there's pause out there for some. I don't know.
There has to be. Now, the question, I don't want to sell Nancy Pelosi short. I think she's the wrong person to be the speaker for a lot of different reasons, but she's a really good vote counter. So if you see that she's put a bill forward to be voted on, she's counted the votes, and she's pretty certain that she does have the votes.
So the thing from a citizen point of view then to watch is the content of that and what actually gets presented to Congress for approval.
Yeah, you know, let's say that a vote comes first, which it does in the House of Representatives. If you're a senator, Republican, Democrat, you're looking at a lot of different things. You're looking also at the politics of it. And so by the time the vote comes to you, one thing I think that you've got to think about is the bill that came from the House of Representatives, does it have bipartisan support? How much bipartisan support does it have? And that makes it a little bit easier to vote one way or the other way. Going back to this $1.9 trillion stimulus, there was not one Republican congressman, no matter how moderate he or she might be, that voted for it. There was not one United States senator, no matter how moderate he or she might be, that voted for that stimulus. Okay. And so there has to be, right now, if Biden wants bipartisan support, there's got to be give and take. And the fact of the matter is that if this bill, and again, we've not seen anything,
it, right.
But if it gets loaded up, and if there are the tax increases that are being talked about, that are part of the equation, it makes it very tough.
Right.
And I think that any conservative Republican is almost disingenuous if they vote for it.
So it's not the concept of infrastructure investment or whatever. Of course, there will be environmental changes and other things, and the revenue side will be hotly debated. So the devil's in the details, so we watch the details and see how it emerges by the time it gets to the House.
No doubt about it. Again, you look at any representative, Republican, Democrat, what have you, they want good roads, they want good bridges, and I think we all know that a lot of our infrastructure across the country, I mentioned roads and bridges, they're in bad shape. Right. And the longer we take to further repair, amend, what have you, the more expensive a proposition it becomes. And so I would really like to see, instead of the White House just saying, here it is, Nancy Pelosi saying, here it is, Chuck Schumer saying, here it is, they need to get input from Republicans before this is voted on and to kind of set the stage. What we're hearing right now is that Nancy Pelosi would like a vote on this by July 4th.
Okay.
Which is not that much time.
Okay. No matter how you feel about it, there's money coming into the 8th District, apparently, out of all this.
Well,
you say the city of Jackson is going to get $14 to $15 million. Wow. And Madison County will get, separate from that, $18 to $19 million.
That's right.
And the school system is getting money in addition to that.
So
I want to ask who's going to pay this back one day.
Well, the answer is it's...
But it is, I guess, a stimulus, or it's at least counties can do things that they may have been delaying.
Yeah. Full disclosure, I voted against it. In the $1.9 trillion stimulus that I talked about earlier, $350 billion with the B is for cities and states.
Wow.
So that's where the city of Jackson gets its $14.5 million. And these numbers are a little bit fluid, so it could change. That's where Madison County gets close to $19 million. I'll give you another couple of examples, though. The city of Memphis, which I partly represent, it has a population of around 650,000 people, give or take. The city of Detroit has a population, not the metro area, but the city, 670,000. Right. The city of Memphis, under this bill, is getting around $165 to $170 million. The city of Detroit is getting about $700 million. $700 million. The city of New York City is going to get $4.3 billion.
Okay.
I look at our states around the country. Tennessee historically has been well managed fiscally. We've had a string of governors and state legislatures who've done a good job balancing the budget. The state of Tennessee has a surplus. The state's still getting money. The state of Illinois historically has been mismanaged.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to get somewhere between 22 and $36 billion.
Okay.
It'll plug that hole, and a lot of that is pension related. I think it's wrong because, to your point, we're going to have to pay this back, and it's going to be the next generation after us and the generation after them.
Hope it works, because if we get the economic boost out of it, right, that would be the argument. We will see. Many other things to talk about. One, in this balance of power, voting laws coming out of Georgia. The reaction and coverage is, on one side, Republicans saying, look, these are needed. This election integrity, verification of identity is important. On the other side, it is presented as a return to Jim Crow, that it is racist, an inherent bigoted attempt to suppress vote in this country.
You know,
And the balance of power is close.
Well,
in
and I look at
Congress
it,
and the Senate.
I look at it from the federal perspective also, because, voting should be a state and local function. I think the states and the local areas, the counties and the cities should decide the voting rules and how they're administered. You talked about Georgia. The state of Oregon will mail a ballot out to everybody. I think that's wrong, but I don't live in Oregon, and let them do what they want to do. So take it one step further. The federal government, Congress, within the last few weeks, voted on a bill that would essentially federalize all elections. For the people watching, the bill number is H.R. 1. And so what that does, you talked about Georgia, Tennessee, where I think people have good access to vote. We've got plenty of availability in early voting, and everybody in Madison County, they want to go vote, can go vote. This bill would remove the right of states to enforce voter ID laws, for example. It would mandate mail-in ballots. It would mandate these drop boxes like California has. It would take the authority and the decision-making away from our state Secretary of State, Trey Hargett, and from the Madison County Election Commission and all other election commissions. I think that's wrong. It should be a state and local function. If Georgia passed that law last week, the governor signed it into law. I've heard all the criticisms. I've watched a lot of coverage. I've read about it. It's a Georgia issue, just like Oregon conducts their elections, just like California. We don't want to deny the right to anybody to vote.
That becomes the accusation, and I guess that becomes the whole rationale for federalizing in essence, is because somebody's got to monitor these states because they are within those borders suppressing it. It depends on how it's presented and how it's sold, and what the U.S. Senate will do with this. Right.
That's right. And so, on the Georgia standpoint, we know they had very active elections. Some people would say, they've got these primaries that are a lot of times they're referred to as jungle primaries, where everybody's jumbled up together, and the top two people, Republican, Democrat, then they have a runoff. Yeah. Is that the right way to do it? In my opinion, probably not. I'm not a Georgia State legislator.
Let me take this break. Congressman David Kustoff is with us. This is Capitol Talk at E+ TV6. We're in this together, staying updated on current situations, sharing the stories that touch our lives, joining in laughter that brings smiles to our faces, connecting online when we're miles apart. We're in this together. The E Plus broadband fiber network brings the speeds and connectivity we need to stay in touch more than ever, backed up by the customer service on which you depend. Thank you for counting on us at E Plus Broadband. Welcome back to Capitol Talk. Steve Bowers with you. A presentation of the Chamber here in Jackson with 8th District Congressman David Kustoff. A presentation of the Allison Insurance Group, Alexander Thompson and Arnold, AT&T, First Bank, Gerdau, Jackson Energy Authority, Stan Harris, Voya, Steve Little and Brad Little, and West Tennessee Healthcare. We were talking about the voting bill that had passed in the House, and it'll now be in the hands of the Senate. And so where do you see this going, or what kind of discussion will we see out of this?
It's very interesting because, you know, now that the House has passed it, the House of Representatives, on party lines, goes to the Senate. Now, the Senate normally would have to overcome what's called the filibuster, which I think a lot of people know about and you've heard about. It's really what kind of separates the Senate from the House in that they've got a 60-vote requirement to advance these bills. So, you know, it's an important bill for the Democrats. They named it in the House of Representatives H.R. 1 meaning their most important bill of the 2 years. In the Senate, they've named it S1, their most important bill. The issue to me, Steve, is will the Senate keep the filibuster or will they get rid of it for this bill? And if the filibuster is kept, I don't know how it passes the way it passed the House. I don't think the votes are there, not 60 votes. Will they blow up the filibuster?
Okay.
And that is the big question. And if they do, do they have the votes to pass it?
My impression is the president's getting tremendous pressure to break this, and I noticed that former President Obama is now labeling this kind of a hangover of Jim Crow, right?
You're right.
And runoffs in states are now being labeled this. You know, there's another interpretation of that. It's like, no, it's an effort to bring some kind of consensus, you know, with runoffs and with the filibuster, the cloture rule, or whatever. So I don't know. The risky thing, it would seem, looking at this as somebody that's not involved in this, is that if you blow this up, then you know you better hang on to the majority. And the Senate is very, very close, and you got elections coming up in 2 years. Because if you blow it up and counter all the rhetoric of decades now, then if the other party ever gets control, then here we go. It will not come back.
You know, that is exactly Mitch McConnell's argument, who, of course, is the Republican leader in the Senate. He actually got pressure within the 2 to 4 years prior to get rid of the filibuster from Republicans. And his argument was exactly the way you framed it, Steve, is that in the Senate, we go back and forth between Republican control and Democrat control, and what may sound good today while you're in the majority, when you go to the minority, it's going to mean it's not much fun. And so McConnell's been consistent because he's saying exactly the same thing right now, that you Democrats, if you blow this up, if you do this, and we get control back in 2 years, it's not going to be much fun for you. And so we'll have to see. But the fact of the matter is that not only does it set you down a slippery slope as a republic by eliminating the filibuster, if you start federalizing elections, which again typically are state-driven and local government-driven, then where do you draw the line?
I just wonder what the mechanism of enforcement and monitoring would be. If it's federal law, then that becomes another challenge. That's another thing. We could talk about it all day, but it will be interesting stuff to watch and very important.
It will be.
You've been to the border in past years, and it has become a hot spot of discussion right now. What's your sense of what's happening there? What do we need to be doing?
You know, I went about a year and a half ago. President Trump was president, summer of 2019, and I really got the chance to visit with border control agents. We had National Guard there. We've got a lot of law enforcement that patrols the border. I was in the El Paso area. And I learned a lot. One thing I learned is that the measures that we, Congress, were employing at that time and under President Trump's leadership, we were stemming the flow of illegal immigration. Our agents, I would ask them directly, they were getting the resources, they were seeing a slowdown. President Trump had gotten the attention of the Mexican government, who in prior years were kind of looking the other way when people wanted to cross the border from Mexico into the United States. The president essentially threatened them financially, President Trump did, and the Mexican authorities were doing a much better job patrolling their side of the border. I learned the tricks that our people would use to track people and how people would try to evade them. And the lessons are, number one, people, they want to come to the United States, but they need to do it the right way. I went up in a helicopter one night with the National Guard. I had a National Guard pilot, I had a co-pilot in front of me, a guardsman to my left who was operating a camera that would zoom down to the ground, and an armed agent behind me. And we were probably up about 10 minutes that night in the helicopter along the fence. And the guardsman who was operating the camera said, "Congressman, look at my screen." And he's got a big computer screen there. And I saw two people on our side of the border, and they were just there. And he said to me, he said, "We call them give-ups. They want to be arrested. They want to go into custody. And I'm not trying to be funny about this, but wherever we're taking them is probably a lot better than where they came from in terms of living conditions." And so, you know, you flash forward during the presidential campaign, Biden sent the message. The message was clear. We want you. You know, we're dealing with COVID. You can't go many places without getting a COVID test and to make sure you're COVID free. We got people coming over the border. We don't know what their health conditions are. And so he invited this. And our border control folks are overwhelmed right now. You know, the last month that I've seen, February of this year, there was a 173% increase in those who had tried to come over than the February before. And to me, that is that's tragic. And the president is not focused on it. And I think by assigning the vice president to be the head of the task force or whatever, it's a joke because she's not concerned.
What I wondered, once you take children in and you assume custody of them and they come across the border, I don't know what you do with them. Do you raise them? Do you send? I mean, they have no place to go back to that I know. The longer they stay here, the less they'll have any connection with from which they came. I'm at a loss to.
Well,
I think that's what we struggle with as a nation. You don't want to be bad humanitarian, uncaring, or unkind. At the same time, I don't know what you do.
But Steve, we've invited this.
Right.
Biden's invited this.
Right.
I had a colleague that went down 2 weeks ago. He said that he saw 3 children without adults that had come over. One was 5, 3, and 2 years old, all holding hands. No adult. They were guided that way. Now, you're right. You're right. It is a real problem.
Right.
It's a real problem. But the first thing we've got to do is send the message, don't do this anymore.
Okay. Good luck with that. We will see. You mentioned COVID, and as we look back on it, we're a year into this experience. Have we handled this well, not well? What would you see that we should do differently?
I think we've done a lot of things right. And, you know, here we are, we're 12 months past the declaration of the pandemic. And, you know, you think while there were complaints early on about PPE and ventilators, President Trump secured enough PPE. He ordered, under the Defense Production Act, big factories like General Motors and Ford to start making ventilators, and then we didn't hear the issue about ventilators anymore. Issue about testing, now anybody can get a test that wants to get a test. And I think one of the most remarkable things is, you know, we invented a vaccine from the ground up that apparently is pretty doggone effective. You've got 2 vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, that are 93, 94, 95% effective, which I think is great news. And, you know, from March when the pandemic was declared till December when we started getting them in people's arms. When we look back on this 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, I think we're going to be amazed at the things that we were able to do. Now, that's no excuse. There are far too many people that got sick. a lot of people, as we know, died as a result of COVID-19. But I think we did, in hindsight, a lot of things right. I am concerned about the shutdowns and the effect that it's had on businesses, on children. You know, in my district, there were some children that were out of school almost 12 months.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, we're seeing initiatives with the state legislature to try to protect business, you know, and independently be able to stay open or whatever. I mean, it's in a lot of civil liberties issues. At the same time, collective health, we had, what, over half a million people to die in this country from this. So it was not the flu. You know, one time they said, well, it's like the flu. It's like, no, this was a different deal.
I think about, you know, I was in all these briefings at the Capitol in January, February, March with a lot of different experts. And, you know, the thing is, everything changes, it evolves, and that's fair. I can remember being in a briefing in February, some congressman in the back of the room stands up and asks this panel of doctors that's in the front of the room, do we need to wear masks? And Dr. Fauci got up, and he said, you don't need to wear a mask.
I said, no.
Don't need to wear a mask. Well, that changed. I'm not beating up on Dr. Fauci about that. I'm just saying that when you look at the moment in time, the answer then may be different than the answer 3 months from there or even now.
It's a big globe. Next time you come, we'll get on the other side of the ocean and talk about China and Middle East and Afghanistan, all this other stuff. We have a limited time this time, and I appreciate you doing this.
Thank you.
I know you'd like to have an opportunity to talk to the constituents of your district, this city.
Yeah, you know, and I appreciate that. I think about this nation. I think about our history a lot. I love American history, and I think a lot of people watching do. And I think about all the difficult times that this nation has been in. We've been in 2 world wars. We had Vietnam. We had the Spanish flu. We survived a civil war.
We did.
And I guess my point is to you, to anybody watching, this is a tough time. I'm in Washington. It's a tough atmosphere there at the Capitol. It is tough. A lot of tension, a lot of emotion. But you know, if you or I had lived from 1861 to 1865 during the Civil War, probably the toughest time in our nation's history.
And even the years after were tough.
Right. We got through all that.
Yeah.
And we'll get through this, and we'll be stronger as a nation, stronger as a people. I've got great faith in our people, in the people who serve, especially at the local and state level, because, Steve, there was no playbook to deal with COVID. And our leaders here in West Tennessee, they've done a doggone good job.
Always appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
Thank you, Steve.
I guess the thing I regret right now in all this discussion is the fact that you can be labeled racist or whatever, you know, when there are issues to be discussed, and it's just, it complicates everything. It complicates things as far as media coverage. It complicates everything out there because the attack is not on position, but it's on motive, and that gets into a whole different type of politics. I hope we can get past that. I think at times we have. I think 9/11 did that for us. It shocked us to a certain extent. We felt vulnerable for that brief moment. It's like somebody's after us here, and we pull together as a nation. I trust we will again.
I do too. I would say if there's any advice I could give people, I think about President Lincoln. We talked about the Civil War, and you know, what the story is that he would get mad, and he'd write a hot letter, and then he would put it in his desk drawer.
Okay.
And the next day he'd look at the letter, and if he still felt mad about it, he'd get the letter out. A lot of times he'd crumple it up and throw it away.
Okay. So think before you click.
That's exactly right. That is exactly right.
Okay. It's good to see you.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much,
your
Steve.
time.
Thank you.
Hey, this is Congressman David Kustoff with us. Our thanks to him for being with us, the Chamber for putting together this Capitol Talk, and for you for being with us here at E+ TV6.